All right, welcome back to another episode. Now I'm just kidding. Another lesson for Math 8. We're going to do division by zero, which a lot of you are like, Mr. Silva, you only think that you can't do division by zero. But for those of you who were last year, as Adriel can recall, I'm pretty sure, would know that we actually did a lesson like this towards the end of the book as well. And so we're going to do division by zero, which is something that we've done before. Let's get into the lesson. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know is that zero, obviously, in a number line is going to be in the middle, but the whole number closest to zero will be 1, and the other integer that is closer to zero is -1. They're actually 1 away from each other. But we can actually also say negative 0.1 is going to be closer to 0 than -1. And 0.1 is going to be closer to 0 than 1. And then we have 0.01, which is really close to 0. And then we have negative 0.01, which is really close to 0 as well. And so as you keep going, you will see that it gets closer and closer and closer to 0. But what's the point of this? Well, the point is that we can't actually divide by 0. So, because if you do it in a calculator, you can't do it. Okay? But we're going to try to find a way to do it. And we'll see how that is by just looking at that -1 is close to 0, but negative 0.1 is closer to 0, and negative 0.01 is even closer to 0. Same thing goes for 1 is close to 0, 0.1 is closer to 0, and 0.01 is even closer to 0. So, example 1 has this. What happens if we divide 10 by 1? Well, 10 by 1 is just 10, right? But what is 10 divided by 0.1? You can't divide by a decimal, so you're supposed to move it 1 over like this, right? And so this also needs to be moved once, and a 0 goes here, so it becomes 100. And then this obviously then becomes 1,000, because we're supposed to move it once, 2 times. So if it's here, once, 2, 1,000 over 1. So we got 10, 100, and 1,000. Oh, okay. What about B, though? B is the same thing, except it's negative. We're going to get negative 10, we're going to get negative 100, and we're going to get negative 1,000. How did we do that? The same way we did here, except it's -1, negative 0.1, negative 0.01. So what happens here? Well, 0.1 is supposed to be closer to 0 than 1, right? And negative 0.01 is closer to 0 than -1. So when we divide by 10, right, what happens is that if we divide not 10 by -1, 10 by negative 0.1, and 10 by negative 0.01, we're going to see that this actually is far from 0, right? It's less than 0. Negative 10 is less than 0. But 100 is even less, even way less than 0. And 1,000 is like way less than 0. Same thing here, except it's positive. 10 is far away from 0. 100 is super far away from 0. And 0 is extremely far from 0. So this is kind of weird, because as we start to divide to get closer and closer to 0, in here we get even less and less. So the closer we get to this before 0, we get a lesser and lesser number, because negative 1,000 is less than negative 100, which is less than negative 10. But as we get closer and closer here, we're going to get a higher and higher and higher number. This is why it's impossible. Because if we look at from the left, it's going to be negative. And if you look at from the right, it's going to be positive. Oh, okay. So what can we do? Well, in example 2, hopefully I don't have to go over the facts. Because they say, oh, okay, what happens if you have like 2 times 0? Do the facts, okay? 2 times 0 is 0, right? But then if we divide 0 by 2, we get 0. Oh, that's fine. But then what happens if we divide 2 by 0? Do we get something? No. We put DNE, does not exist. Oh, okay. So that's example 2. But what I was trying to work on, and I don't know why your book does it that way, but I was trying to work on if you approach from the left on 0 and start dividing a number like 10 by a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller number, you're going to get a bigger and bigger and bigger number. And if you do it from, if you do it from the left, 10 divided by -1 divided by negative 0.1 divided by negative 0.01 divided by negative 0.001, it's going to keep getting even smaller and smaller and smaller, further away from the 0 to the left. Okay? If we approach it from the right, in here, what we're doing is we're going to get a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger number and further away from it to the right. So that's interesting. Okay? Keep that in mind. Let's move on to a bonus question. So, let me see if it's still recording. Because sometimes it stops and I'm like, no, don't stop. All right, so I had to write in my other board a couple of ideas of what to do. So, for today's bonus, down in the YouTube comments, I want you to write your favorite verse. Okay? What is your favorite Bible verse? Okay? It doesn't have to always be the same. I have many different favorite Bible verses. I mean, one of the ones that got me through a very rough time when I was little was Psalm 4:8. I don't know how to say it in English, but in Spanish is, en paz me acostaré y asimismo dormiré, porque solo tú, Jehová, me haces vivir confiado. Right? And so, that's just one of the many verses that I love. Psalm 1:3, it says, será como árbol plantado junto a corrientes de agua que da fruto a su tiempo y su hoja no cae. So, yeah, there's so many different verses that I love. So, yeah, but I'm not going to go into the ones that I really, really love. I'm going to talk to you about the ones that you love. So if you want the bonus points down below, you write your verse. It doesn't have to be that forever. It's just right now, which one do you like? And for those of you who actually do it later, which has started to happen a little bit in 8th and 7th grade, 9th grade hasn't gotten hip to the bonus points. To those of you who are late for the verse part, you can actually write in the Google Classroom where I post the video, you can actually write what your favorite candy is. Now, for those of you who write it in the YouTube comments, obviously you get 3 points. For those of you who write it in the Google Classroom, it's 2 points. The only exception is Andrew, which can put it in the Google Classroom for 3 points. But that he is the only exception. Why? Because his parents reached out to me. And they explained to me, and so that's fine. But even then, he doesn't comment anything, and he has gotten 0 bonus points. But that's on him, not me. So, yeah, that's what we're going to do. Let's actually move on to example number 3. All right, so in example number 3, the last example for this lesson, we have y equals 12 over x plus 2. Hopefully this doesn't look too intimidating or too hard, because we're going to see this a lot next year. A whole lot. Now, the question is here, so if we have this and we want to graph it, there's something that's going to happen, right? Look at what the question is saying. If we were asked to graph the following equation, what number could we not use in place of x when generating a table of the order pairs? What we're trying to say is, can you divide by 0? No, you can't. We already established this, right? Because as we approach it from the left, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. But as we approach it from the right, it's going to get larger and larger and larger. So it makes no sense. It will never meet because large and smaller never meets. They'll go like this, like kind of opposites. Hopefully I'm trying to do it. If not, it could be a great new TikTok dance. So, you know, with the leg and there you go. You're welcome, TikTok. And so once we actually are done with this, we can understand that we cannot divide by 0. It's just not possible. It just doesn't make sense for us to be able to divide by 0. And so what happens here is that there is a value for x, because what can x be? X can be any number, right? But there's a number here that if we put it for x, the denominator becomes 0, and then we won't know what it is. So the easiest way for me to tell you how to do it is to do the following. I don't know how the book tells you it, and I don't really care for it, really. I want you to understand this. Because what value can't the denominator be? The denominator can never be 0, right? So we're going to say, well, I'm going to take my denominator, bring it down here, x plus 2, and I'm going to make it equal to 0. Why am I going to make it equal to 0? Because that way, I'm going to find out what value of x cannot be put here, because if not, then the whole thing would be equal to 0. That makes sense, right? I don't want my denominator to be equal to 0. So I'm going to find out what value I can't put in here by making it equal to 0, solving for x, right? Leaving x by itself. And that value I cannot put in the denominator because it will make it 0. And I cannot divide by 0. So that is going to be this. X cannot be negative 2. All right, that's an unequal sign. X cannot be negative 2. Why? Because what is negative 2 plus 2? If you're still having problems with integer addition and subtraction, you need to get better at it. But negative 2 plus 2, it's not negative 4. It's actually 0. Is the same thing as 2 minus 2. What is 2 minus 2? 2 minus 2 is 0. We cannot have a 0 in the denominator. The value that x cannot be is negative 2. And that's how you do this lesson. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.